Previously on GCN Tech, Ollie showed you his brand new Canyon Aeroad CFR and told you everything that you need to know about it. Well, I can go one better than that because Canyon have also been kind enough to send me a brand new bike too. The Ultimate road bike. No, quite literally, that is the name. It's called the Canyon Ultimate. In this video, I am going to explain why I feel like my choice of bike is far superior to Ollie's choice of bike. I'm also going to explain all the details of the bike, run through some of the parts that I've changed, and then also explain why, even though I could have had any bike from Canyon's range, I chose not to have the range-topping CFR, but I chose to have the second-tier CF SLX bike and also choose SRAM's second-tier Force Groupset. Let's take a closer look at the bike. So here is my brand new bike. It's the Canyon Ultimate CF SLX, and it's actually the first time I've deviated away from the Canyon Aeroad since I first used one back in 2017, and I've also had the luxury of using pretty much every version of Aeroad ever since then. Now the honest truth and reason as to why I've got a brand new bike, I think will make you laugh. Essentially, Dan stole my Canyon Aeroad when he decided to go all fit and healthy again.
And I didn't give a flying flip what mine was.
Anyway, the reason why I've chosen this bike actually came about after I was thinking about it long and hard, because I needed to decide what type of bike I really wanted to be using when I was creating videos here on GCN Tech and on GCN, but also the type of bike that I wanted to ride when I went out cycling in my own free time. While my love for tubeless tyres and aero bikes still very much lives on, I have started to deviate away from them slightly for much of my general day-to-day riding. And more on that later on, because first, I think we need to have a run through of the exact spec of the bike. So the bike, as I've said, is a Canyon Ultimate CF SLX 8 in Arctic Blue. The bike is fitted with SRAM Force. This is 12-speed wireless shifting, disc brake, and in terms of the gearing, it's a 35, 48 tooth chainrings up front, and then a 10 to 33 tooth cassette at the back. Now those chainring options up front are considerably smaller than what I would traditionally choose to use on my bike, and they actually sit as the middle option for the offerings that SRAM have for the chainring sizes here on this bike. And I gotta say, for the general riding that I'm doing and when I'm not out trying to race or go as fast as possible, having that slightly smaller big ring is actually a good thing, because it means when it's paired up with a wide range cassette at the back, I can spend more of my time still riding in the big ring rather than having to constantly change into the small ring anytime the road goes slightly uphill, which I think is a good thing. While we're at the front of the bike, one other cool feature I really like is that there's a little stop incorporated and hidden into the frame. What that means is that as the handlebars turn around, they stop before the handlebars would strike the top tube. Now this is a really small detail and subtle, but I do really like it, because if you've ever picked your bike up and had the handlebars swing around and hit the top tube, not only does it make an incredibly unpleasant noise, you do also run the risk of cracking or damaging the frame. So yeah, nice little feature that. The crank arms are 172.5 millimeters long, which is pretty much the norm for the majority of bikes, although normally I tend to run 170 mil. But I've got to say, that little difference of 2.5 millimeters really isn't the end of the world, and I think most people would struggle to tell the difference. So I'm not going to be rushing to switch those out, because it's quite a considerable expense for what is a fairly small change. Now, the bike is in a near stock setup, and I've only made a few little tweaks to it. I'm going to continue to evolve the setup of this bike over time, but I've got to say, out of the box, this is one hell of a bit of kit. Now, the changes that I have made are the wheels and tyres, the most visual thing that you can see here. So these are the Elite Wheels Drive 50s. We've got carbon fibre spokes, carbon fibre rims, 50 millimeters deep, as the name suggests. And whilst these wheels come out of the box tubeless ready, shock horror, I'm not actually running them set up tubeless. I've got inner tubes installed onto this bike. So the tyres are the P0 Race with a classic sidewall, and I've got inner tubes in there. Not standard inner tubes, they're actually TPU inner tubes. Some that I got from Amazon, which only cost £10, but are super lightweight at just 24 grams. Now, I want to talk a little bit more about the tyres, because I think this is something that most people will find particularly interesting and will be surprised at my choices. Now, one of the many good things about these wheels is that the rims are hooked, which means you've got the greatest flexibility in terms of your tyre choices and the setup options that you can choose to run. Now, seeing as I've said I plan to use this bike for a lot of my general day-to-day riding, that's one of the reasons I've gone for an inner tube setup. Plus, it actually is a little bit lighter than running a tubeless setup here. And so far, I've got to say, offers a near comparable feeling to a tubeless setup in terms of comfort and speed. Now, there is about 100 grams saving to be had here overall when you compare this setup to a tubeless one. That is for a number of different reasons. Number one, the tyres are slightly lighter in the first instance. And then number two, because I've got these super lightweight inner tubes, they're actually lighter than a tubeless valve and the sealant that you would have to put inside. The downside is that you do lose a little bit of that puncture protection because you haven't got the sealant inside the tyre if you get any small thorns or whatever to help seal the tyre up. Now, Pirelli will say that this setup isn't actually their fastest option, but I've got to say, in terms of when you're out riding in the real world, it feels pretty comparable to the feelings that I've had when I'm out riding their latest tyre, which is the P0 Race TLR RS. Plus, there's one other very important factor to consider. These look absolutely boss in the classic sidewall colour, and at the moment, the new RS tyre is only available in black. Oh, and of course, the chain is waxed. Other details on this bike that I want to talk about, the bottle cages. They're from Topi, they're carbon fibre, and most importantly of all, each one is 3 grams lighter than the bottle cages on Ollie's bike. Plus, I've got titanium bolts attached to them to the bike, which have been anodized pink. No joke, I actually had these bolts sat as spares in my spares cupboard, just next to my Dura-Ace cranks. Yes, I'm still going to keep that joke going. The pedals I got fitted on the bike are the standard pedals that I use across all of my different bikes. These are the ones from Wahoo. The saddle is actually slightly different to the norm. This is what came with the bike. It's the Cellitalia SLR Superfloat. And whilst I have used this saddle a number of times in the past with this really large cutout, typically I tend to use the SLR Novus Boost Evo, which is the shorter nose saddle, which is ever so slightly wider. Now, I find it really interesting that Ollie and I have independently chosen opposing bikes from Canyon. Now, this isn't something that we discussed previous to making our decisions on what bikes we were going to get. And I find it interesting to see that even though Ollie has spent the last few years riding the Canyon Ultimate, he's now gone to an Aeroad. And even though I've spent the last few years riding a Canyon Aeroad, I've now gone to the Ultimate. What I think this means is that both of us appreciate the fact that there is a subtle difference in the performance between these bikes. And whatever way you want to look at it, the Aeroad is the more aerodynamic bike out of the two. But I think it's really important that everyone remembers the most important factors affecting the speed and performance of your overall bike setup is your body position and your fitness and strength levels as the rider, and the bike is just one small piece of the puzzle. Now, if I was to put my logical and sensible head on, it tells me that a more all-round kind of bike, similar to the Canyon Ultimate, is going to be more suited to more people more of the time. Hence why I think it's the superior bike compared to Ollie's. In terms of the weights of the bike, 7.3 kilograms how it sits with bottle cages and pedals on, without my saddlebag of course, which is almost exactly the same weight as Ollie's Canyon Aeroad. Both of us are riding a size large, which is quite an interesting point to talk about here, and what I'm going to talk about next. Because in terms of some of the setups and how we've got our bikes positioned, even though Ollie and I are pretty much comparable in terms of our heights, I think I'm actually 1.5 centimeters taller, but that's a small difference. We actually have considerably different saddle heights. So the saddle height I run across all of my bikes is 82.5 centimeters from the center of the bottom bracket up to the top of the saddle, which is some 6 centimeters higher than what Ollie has, which is quite considerable. Now, the difference in height and bike setup between Ollie and I isn't really an important bit I'm trying to get at here, because the important takeaway point is that you shouldn't just use your body height as an indicator of what size bike you need, because everyone's body shapes and proportions are considerably different. And I think it's why it's incredibly important to A, try to get a bike fit before ordering your size bike, or head to your local bike shop and try different size bikes, because height only is not a good way to try and decide what bike you need. Some other key measurements in terms of my bike setup: the saddle to handlebar drop is 14 centimeters, The nose of the saddle to the center of the handlebars is 61 centimeters, and then up front the bike comes supplied with a 110mm stem with this really cool design where you can adjust the width of the handlebars and adjust the height that the handlebars sit at without the need to cut any components, which I think is a really neat feature and is great to enable adjustability to get this bike set up just right for you. Now, I've only clocked up just under 1,000 kilometers or so on this bike, and I'm still trying to decide if I want to tweak my position ever so slightly. But I do have the handlebar set up in the lowest position possible. I guess you could call it slammed with no spaces underneath. And then I've also got the handlebar width on the narrowest option as well. And if you were to take the measurement, here at the lever mounting points, it's about 38 centimeters wide. The drops have got a very slight flare to them. So measured on the drops, center to center is much closer to a 40. And then because, much like Ollie said, quite literally the UCI has no jurisdiction here, well, I've got the levers angled in ever so slightly. So when you're holding them, it's much closer to a 36 centimeter handlebar, which is great for aerodynamics. And then I genuinely do believe that if you are going to have just one bike, this kind of all-round do-it-all does mean you've got an option which is better suited to your type of riding for the majority of the time than if you were just to have an aero bike. One thing I do feel very strongly about that I certainly cannot argue about is the fact that Ollie's bike does look much, much cooler in terms of the colour. Now, if you haven't seen Ollie's bike, what the hell are you playing at? And there can be only one reason for it, and that means that you haven't actually subscribed to GCN Tech, otherwise you would have seen the video already. So subscribe to GCN Tech, watch the video, and then you can let me know in the comments section down below whether you prefer my bike or Ollie's bike. So there you go, there's a closer look at my new bike, and also a little bit of fun comparing my bike to Ollie's new bike. But it really doesn't matter. Whatever you do, just choose a bike that you enjoy riding the most and is going to make you want to get out and ride your bike more. I do want to say quick thanks to Canyon for supplying me with a new bike and their continued support of GCN and GCN Tech, which means we can make all the exciting videos for you to enjoy for free. Right, as I said, do let me know in the comments section down below whose bike you prefer the most. And well, I'm out of here because I'm going to go enjoy riding my bike tonight. See you later, bye.